A Christmas Carol in Prose by Charles Dickens. I have endeavored in this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an idea which shall not put my readers out of humor with themselves, with each other, with the season, or with me. May it haunt their houses pleasantly, and no one wish to lay it. Their faithful friend and servant, Charles Dickens, December 1843. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of the burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it. Oh, Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know of my own knowledge what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade, but the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. The name of the firm was Scrooge and Marley. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole friend, and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but he was an excellent man of business. On the very day of the funeral. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood 7 years afterwards above the old warehouse door. Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley. He answered to both names. It made no difference to him. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point I started from, that there is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come from the story I am going to relate. If we were not perfectly convinced that Hamlet's father had died before the play began, there would be nothing more remarkable in the old man taking a stroll at night than there would be in any other middle-aged gentleman rashly turning out after dark in a breezy spot to astonish his son's weak mind. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, was Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within froze his old features. External heat or cold had little influence over Scrooge. No warmth could warm, no wintry weather chill him, no wind that blew was more bitter than he. The hardest rain and snow and hail and sleet could boast of the advantage over Scrooge in only one respect. They often came down handsomely, and Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts and wag their tails as though they said, "No eye is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Once upon a time, of all the good days of the year, upon a Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. The door of his office was open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who, in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was busy copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal.
"A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!"
cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who had come upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach.
"Bah!"
said Scrooge.
"Humbug! Christmas? A humbug, Uncle? You don't mean it. I am sure I do. Merry Christmas! What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough. What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough. Ah, bah! Don't be cross, Uncle. What else can I be? When I live in a world of such fools as this. What's Christmas time to you but a time to find yourself a year older and not an hour richer? If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should. Uncle, nephew, keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine. But you don't keep it. Let me leave it alone then. Much good may it do you.
There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, Christmas among the rest. I have always thought of Christmas time, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable time, the only time that I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to see people below them as if they really were fellow travelers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. Therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold into my pocket, I believe it has done me good and will do me good, and I say, God bless it. The clerk involuntarily applauded.
Another sound from you, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You're quite a powerful speaker, sir, when you don't go into Parliament. Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow.
Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, indeed he did. He went the whole length of the expression to say that he would see him in that extremity first.
But why? Why did you get married? Well, because I fell in love. Because you fell in love. Good afternoon.
I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends? But I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So, a Merry Christmas, Uncle.
Good afternoon, and a Happy New Year. Good afternoon.
The nephew left the office without an angry word notwithstanding. The clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, let two other people in. They now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office.
Scrooge and Marley's, I believe,
said one of the gentlemen.
Do I have the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago, this very night. Oh, we have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner.
Scrooge frowned.
At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at this time. Are there no prisons? No workhouses? Oh, both very busy, sir. I was afraid from what you said that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course. I'm glad to hear it. Under the impression they scarcely furnish Christian cheer for mind and body, a few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What may we put you down for? Nothing. Oh, you wish to be anonymous? I wish to be left alone. I don't make merry at Christmas time, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help support the establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough. Those who are badly off must go there. Oh, many can't go there, and many would rather die. If they would rather die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Good afternoon.
Seeing clearly it was useless to pursue their point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge resumed his labors with an improved opinion of himself. Meanwhile, the fog and darkness thickened. The ancient tower of a church, whose gruff old bell was always slyly peeping down at Scrooge out of a Gothic window in the wall, struck the hours and quarters in the clouds with tremulous vibrations afterwards, as if its teeth were chattering in its frozen head up there. Foggier yet and colder still, a piercing, searching, biting cold. If the good Saint Dunstan had but nipped the evil spirit's nose with weather such as this, he would indeed roared to lusty purpose. The owner of one scant young nose, gnawed and mumbled by the hungry cold as bones are gnawed by dogs, stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol. But at the first words of "God rest you merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay," Scrooge seized the ruler with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog and more congenial frost. At length, the hour for shutting up that counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge admitted the fact to his expectant clerk, who immediately snuffed out his candle and put on his hat. "You'll want the whole day tomorrow, I suppose?" "Well, if it's quite convenient, sir." "It's not convenient. And it's not fair. If I were to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound. But you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work." "But it's only once a year, sir." "A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 20th of December," said Scrooge, buttoning his greatcoat to the chin. "But I suppose you must have the whole day tomorrow. Be here all the earlier the next morning." The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read through all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, he went home. He lived in chambers which had formerly belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of building up a yard which was so dark he was fain to grope with his hands. Having the key in the lock of the door, he saw in the knocker of the door by a sudden dismal light not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. As he looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. Scrooge said, and closed the door. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Scrooge latched the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly too, trimming his candle as he went. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. Before he shut his heavy chamber door, he went through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Quite satisfied, he closed the door and locked himself in, double-locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and his slippers and his nightcap, and sat before the fire to take his gruel. As he threw his head back in his chair, his glance happened to rest upon a disused bell that hung in the room. It was with great astonishment that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing. Soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This was succeeded by a clanking noise from deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain of the wooden casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Then he heard the noise much louder coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. It's humbug! I won't believe it! Now it came on through the heavy chamber door and passed into the room. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leapt up as though it cried, I know him! Marley's ghost! And fell again. It was the same face. The very same. Marley in his pigtail usual waistcoat, tights, and boots. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. His body was transparent. Scrooge could see the button on his coat behind. Though he looked the phantom through and through and saw him standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes and marked the folded kerchief round its head and chin, he was still incredulous and fought against his senses. How now? Said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. Who are you? Ask me who I was. Well, who were you then? In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley. Can you sit down? I can. Well, do it then. The ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace as if he were quite used to it. You don't believe in me, observed the ghost. I don't. What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses? Well, I don't know. Why do you doubt your senses? Well, because a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheat. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are. Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes. The truth is, he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his attention and keeping down his horror. How much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking the cloth from off its head and chin, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees, his clasped hands before him. Mercy! Dreadful apparition! Why do you trouble me? Man of the worldly mind, do you believe in me or not? I do. I must. But why do spirits walk about? Why do they come to me? is required of every man, that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. Always me.
The spirit raised a cry and shook its chain and wrung its shadowy hands. You are fettered. Tell me why.
I wear the chain I forged in life. Would you know the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself?
Speak comfort to me, Jacob.
I have none to give. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. Oh, captive, bound, and double-ironed, not to know that any Christian spirit working within its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find this mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness, not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one life's opportunity misused yet. Such was I, oh, such was I.
But you were always a good man of business, Jacob.
Business? Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business.
The spirit raised the chain and flung it heavily upon the ground.
Why did I walk through crowds of beings with my eyes turned down, and never raise them to that blessed star that led the wise men to the poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conducted me? I have come tonight for your sake, Ebenezer, to warn you that you have yet a chance and help of escaping my fate.
You were always a good friend to me, Jacob, thank you.
You will be haunted by 3 ghosts.
Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob?
It is.
Well, I think I'd rather not.
Without their visits, the path I tread you cannot hope to shun. Expect the first tomorrow night when the bell strikes 1.
Can't I take them all at once and have it over, Jacob?
Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that for your own sake you remember what has passed between us.
The apparition walked backward from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that by the time the spectre reached it, it was wide open. It beckoned Scrooge to approach. He became sensible of confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation. The spectre, after listening for a brief moment, joined in the mournful dirge and floated out upon the bleak, dark night. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste and moaning as they went, each one in chains like Marley's ghost. The misery with them all was clearly that though they sought to interfere for good in human matters, they had lost the power forever. Whether these creatures faded into mist or mist enshrouded them, he could not tell, but they and their spirit voices faded together
and the night became as it had been. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked as he had locked it with his own hands. The bolts were undisturbed. He tried to say, "Humbug!" but stopped at the first syllable. And being from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the night, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, he went straight to bed and fell asleep upon the instant. It was so dark when Scrooge awoke. He was endeavoring to pierce the darkness with his ferret eyes when the chimes of a neighboring church struck the 4 quarters. So he listened for the hour, which it now struck with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you, by a hand, and Scrooge found himself face to face with the unearthly figure who drew them. It was a strange figure, rather like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man. Its hair was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and its dress was trimmed with summer flowers. From the crown of its head there sprang a bright, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, and which was the occasion of its wearing, in its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under one arm.
Are you the spirit whose coming was foretold to me?
I am. Its voice was soft and gentle, singularly low, as if instead of being from behind, it were at a great distance.
Who and what are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Long past?
No, your past. The things that you will see with me tonight are shadows of the things that have been. They will have no consciousness of us. Scrooge then made bold as to inquire what business brought him there. Your welfare, your reclamation, rise and walk with me. It would have been in vain for Scrooge to argue that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes. Finding that the spirit made towards the window, he clasped its robes in supplication.
I am mortal and liable to fall.
Bear but a touch of my hand there, said the ghost, placing it upon his heart, and you shall be upheld in more than this. As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields on either hand. It was a clear, cold winter day.
Good heavens!
cried Scrooge, clasping his hands together and looking about him.
I was bred in this place. I was a boy here.
The ghost gazed upon him mildly. Its gentle touch, though light, appeared still present with the old man's sense of feeling. He was conscious of 1,000 odors floating in the air, each one connected to 1,000 thoughts and joys and hopes and cares, long, long forgotten. Then, suddenly, he remembered. He remembered the young boy who had stooped down at his keyhole the night before. Let us go on. Instantly, they stood upon a busy thoroughfare of a city. It was evening. The ghost then stopped by a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it.
Know it? Why, I was apprenticed here.
They went in. At sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind a lofty desk, Scrooge cried out in great excitement,
Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart! Fezziwig alive again.
Old Fezziwig set down his pen and looked up at the clock which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, and laughed all over.
Yo-ho, my boys! It's Christmas Eve, Dick! Christmas Ebenezer! Let's have the shutters up before man can say Jack or Robinson. Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here.
Clear away. There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away, or couldn't have cleared away, with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as any you would desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler, and went up to the lofty desk and made an orchestra of it. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young followers, whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend the milkman. In they all came, some boldly, some shyly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, and away they all went, 20 couple at once. Hands half round and back again, down the middle and up again, round in various stages of affectionate grouping. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his face into a pot of porter, especially for that purpose. There were more dances, and there was cake, and there was negus, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies, and plenty of beer. During the whole of this time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his senses. His heart and soul were in the scene, and with his former self. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up, and Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig, taking their stations on either side of the door, shook hands with each person individually and wished him or her a Merry Christmas. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so great that he deserves this praise?"
It isn't that, Spirit,
said Scrooge, speaking like his former, not his latter self.
It isn't that. Well, he has, had the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say his power lied in words and looks and things so slight and insignificant it were impossible to add and count 'em up. What then? The happiness he gave was just as great as if it cost a fortune.
What is the matter?
Nothing particular. Something, I think. Well, I only wish I could say a word or two to my clerk just now, that's all.
My time is short. Quick. These words were not addressed to Scrooge, nor to anyone whom he could see, but the effect was immediate, for again he saw his former self. He was older now, a man in the prime of his life. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl, dressed in black, in whose eyes there were tears. "It matters little," she said, softly to Scrooge's former self. "To you, very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can comfort you in time to come as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve."
"What idol has displaced you?"
"A golden one."
This is the even-handed dealing of the world. There is nothing on which it is so hard as poverty, and nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth.
I have seen all your nobler aspirations fall off one by one, until the master passion gain engrosses you. Have I not?
What then? If I have grown so much wiser, what then? I have not changed towards you. Have I ever sought release from our engagement?
In words, no.
In what then?
In a changed nature, an altered spirit, another hope at its great end. If you were free to take it, even I believe that you would choose a dowerless girl, or in choosing her, do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do, and I release you with a full heart for the love of him you once were.
Spirit! Remove me from this place.
I have told you that these were shadows of the things that have been, that they are what they are. Do not blame me.
Remove me!
Scrooge remonstrated.
Leave me! Take me back! Haunt me no longer!
He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked upon him with a face in which were fragments of all the faces it had shown him, he wrestled with it. In the struggle, Scrooge observed that its light was burning high and bright, and dimly connecting that with its influence over him, he seized the extinguisher cap and pressed it down upon its head. The spirit dropped to the ground. The extinguisher cap covered the whole of its form, but though Scrooge pressed it down with all his force, he could not hide the light which came streaming from under it in an unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome with an irresistible drowsiness and being in his own room. He gave the cap a parting squeeze in which his hand relaxed, and had just time to reel to bed before he sank into a deep and heavy sleep. Waking in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the clock was again upon the stroke of 1. I don't mind calling on you to believe that he was ready for a good, broad field of strange appearances, and that nothing between a baby and a rhinoceros would have astonished him very much. Now, being prepared for almost anything, he was not, by any means, prepared for nothing. So when the clock struck 1 and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour passed, and nothing came. All this time, as he lay upon his bed, the very core and center of a blaze of ruddy light which came streaming upon it when the clock proclaimed the hour, and which, being only light, was more alarming than a dozen ghosts. He began to believe that the source and secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room. This idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up and shuffled to the door. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the latch, a strange voice called him by name and bade him enter. He obeyed. It was his own room, there was no doubt about that, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green it looked a perfect grove, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney. Heaped upon the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausage, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, immense trout cakes, and great bowls of punch. In easy state upon this couch there sat a giant, glorious to see, who bore a torch, in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and who raised it high to shed its light on Scrooge, who came peeping round the door.
Come in! Come in and know me better, man! I am the ghost of Christmas present!
Scrooge entered timidly. He was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them.
Look upon me!
Scrooge reverently did so.
You have never seen the likes of me before.
Never.
Have never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning, for I am very young, my elder brothers born in these late years.
I don't think I have. I'm afraid I have not. Have you had many brother spirits?
More than 1,800!
A tremendous family to provide for. Spirit, lead me where you will.
Touch my robe.
Scrooge did as he was told. Instantly they stood upon a busy thoroughfare of a snowy Christmas morning, and Scrooge and the spirit passed on invisible to Scrooge's clerk's house. On the threshold of the door, the spirit stopped to bless the Cratchit household with the sprinklings of its torch. Imagine that! Bob had but 15 bob a week. He pocketed on Saturdays but 15 copies of his Christian name, and yet the ghost of Christmas present stopped to bless the Cratchit household. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, brave with ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for sixpence. And she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into a saucepan of potatoes, and getting his monstrous shirt collar, Bob's private property, conferred upon his son and heir in honor of the day, into his mouth, rejoiced to find himself so gallantly attired, and yearned to show his linen in the fashionable park. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, a boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose and known it for their own, and basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, danced about the table and exalted Master Peter to the skies, while he, not proud, blew the fire till the slow potatoes, bubbling up, knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled. "And was got your precious father, then," said Mrs. Cratchit, "and your brother Tiny Tim? Martha, what was late on last Christmas Day by half an hour." "Is Martha, mother?" cried the 2 young Cratchits. "Hurrah! You're such a goose, Martha!" "Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are," said Mrs. Cratchit, kissing her a dozen times. "We'd a deal of work to finish up, and last night, and I declare away this morning, mother." "Well, never mind, as long as you are come. Here, sit you down by the fire, my girl, and have yourself a warm—" "No, no!" cried the 2 young Cratchits, who were everywhere at once. "There's father coming! Aye, Martha, aye!" So Martha hid herself, and in came Bob the father, his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, with Tiny Tim upon his shoulders. Alas for Tiny Tim, who bore a crutch, and his limbs were supported by an iron frame. "What? Where's our Martha?" cried Bob, looking round. "Not coming," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not coming? Not coming on Christmas Day?" Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, so she came out from behind the closet door. The 2 young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him to the wash-house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper. "And how did little Tim behave?" asked Mrs. Cratchit, when Bob had hugged his daughter to his heart's content. "As good as gold, and better. Somehow, he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much, and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me coming home he hoped the people saw him in the church because he was a cripple. He said it might be pleasant for them to remember on Christmas Day who it was who made lame beggars walk and blind men see." His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoke, escorted by the 2 young Cratchits to his seat beside the chimney, while Bob compounded a hot mixture of gin and lemons in a jug and set it on the hob to simmer. Master Peter and the 2 young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy, Master Peter mashed the potatoes, Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce, Martha dusted off the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him to a tiny corner of the table. The 2 young Cratchits set chairs for everybody, not forgetting themselves, and mounting guard upon their posts, crammed spoons into their mouths, lest they should shriek for goose before their turn came to be served. At last the plates were put on, and grace was said, succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it in the breast. And when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight was heard round the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the 2 young Cratchits, beat upon the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried, "Hurrah! There never was such a goose." Bob said there never was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavor, size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration, eked out with applesauce and mashed potatoes. It was a sufficient dinner for the entire family. Indeed, Mrs. Cratchit, surveying one atom of bone upon the plate, said they hadn't ate it all at last. And now, the plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room to take the pudding up and bring it in. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding like a speckled cannonball, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy. Oh, a wonderful pudding! Bob said, and calmly too, that he regarded it as the greatest success Mrs. Cratchit had achieved since their marriage. Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought that it was at all a small pudding for a large family. At last, the dinner was done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, the fire done up, a shovelful of chestnuts was placed upon the fire. The Cratchits gathered round the hearth. At Bob's elbow was a family display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle, but these held the hot stuff in the jug as well as golden goblets would have done. Then Bob proposed a toast. "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us," which all the family re-echoed. "God bless us, everyone," said Tiny Tim, last of all. Then Bob continued the toast. "Mr. Scrooge, I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." "The founder of the feast, indeed," said Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. "I'd like to give him a piece of my mind to feast upon. He'd have a good appetite for it, I am sure." "My dear, the children, Christmas Day." "It should be Christmas Day when one drinks out of such an odious, stingy, odd, unfailing man as Mr. Scrooge." "You know he is, Robert. Oh, he knows it better than you, poor fellow." "My dear," was Bob's mild reply, "Christmas Day. I'll drink his health for your sake on the dice, not for his. Long life to him. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt." The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness in it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mere mention of his name cast a dark shadow over the whole party, which was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes afterwards. But after it had passed, they were 10 times the merrier, with Scrooge the baleful being done with. They were happy, cheerful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. By and by, they had a song about a lost child traveling through the snow, sung by Tiny Tim. Away, away she goes through the snow o'er the hill. Away, away I go through the snow o'er the hill, through the snow o'er the hill. "Spirit," said Scrooge, with an interest he had never shown before, Will Tiny Tim live?" "I see an empty seat beside the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner. If these shadows be not altered by the future, the child will die." "Oh, no, Spirit, say that he will live." "If these shadows be not altered by the future, none other of my race will find him here. What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it, and decrease the surplus population." Scrooge hung his head in shame to hear his words repeated by the Spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief. It is a fair, even-handed, noble dealing of the world, that though there is infection and disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor. It was a great surprise to Scrooge that as this scene vanished, to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much even greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a dry, bright, gleaming room, with the spirit standing beside him and smiling and looking at the same nephew. When Scrooge's nephew laughed, Scrooge's niece by marriage laughed as heartily as he, and their attending guests, being not a bit behindhand, laughed out lustily.
He said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live, and he believed it too.
More shame for him, Fred, said Scrooge's niece indignantly.
He's a comical old fellow, not as pleasant as he might be. However, his offences carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him.
After dinner, they had dessert. After dessert, they had tea. After tea, they had music. After music, they had games. For it is good to be children sometimes, and never better than on Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child. It was a game called Yes and No, in which Scrooge's nephew must think of something, and the rest must find out what, he only answering to the questions yes and no, as the case was. The fire of questioning to which he was exposed elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal, a live animal, rather a disagreeable animal, an animal that growled and grunted sometimes and talked sometimes and lived in London and walked about the streets and wasn't made a show of and wasn't led by anybody and didn't live in a menagerie and wasn't a horse or an ass or a cow or a bull or a dog or a pig or a cat or a bear. At each new question put to him, this nephew was so irresistibly tickled that he had to get up off the sofa and stamp. At last his wife's sister cried out,
I have got it, Fred. I know what it is.
What is it? Cried Fred.
It's your uncle, Scrooge.
Which it certainly was. They passed on with the breath of the last word spoken, and Scrooge and the spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw, and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirit stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful. By struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope. In foreign lands, and they were close at home. In poverty, and it was rich. In misery's every refuge, wherever vain man and his little brief authority had not made fast the door and barred the spirit out, he left his blessings with the sprinklings of his torch and taught Scrooge his precepts. It was a long night, if it were only a night, and it was strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older.
Are spirits' lives so short?
My life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight at midnight.
The chimes were ringing the 3/4 past the hour at that moment.
Look here.
From the foldings of its robe, it brought 2 children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment.
Oh man, look down here!
They were a boy and girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish, where graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with its freshest tints. A stale withered hand had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds, where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacing. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade. Through all the mysteries of wonderful creation has monsters half so horrible and dread. Scrooge started back appalled.
Spirit! Are they yours?
They are man's. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both in all of their degree. But most of all, beware this boy. For on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless this writing be erased.
Have they no refuge? No resource?
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
The clock struck 12. He looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, He remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley. Lifting up his eyes, saw a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. In the very air through which the spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black cloak which left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. The spirit neither spoke nor moved.
I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come. I fear you more than any spectre I have seen, but since I know your purpose is to do me good, and since I hope to be a better man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company. Will you not speak to me?
It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them.
Lead on, spirit. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me. Lead on!
The city seemed to spring up about them, and they were in the midst of it, on 'change amongst the merchants. The ghost stopped by one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk.
No,
said a man with a monstrous chin.
I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead.
When did he die?
Inquired another.
Late last night, I suppose.
Why, what was the matter with him? I thought he'd never die.
God knows.
What has he done with his money?
Asked a red-faced gentleman.
Oh, haven't heard. Hasn't left it to me. That's all I know. Bye-bye.
Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to conversation apparently so trivial. It could scarcely be supposed to have any bearing on the death of Jacob, his old partner. That was past. This ghost's province was the future. But nothing doubting that to whomsoever they did apply, he saw they held some latent moral for his own improvement, and so he resolved to treasure up every word he heard and everything he saw, and especially to observe the shadow of himself as it appeared, for he had been revolving in his mind a change of heart, and he hoped to see his newborn resolutions carried out. They left this busy scene and went into an obscure part of town to a low shop where bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought. A grey-haired rascal of great age sat smoking a pipe. Scrooge and the spirit came into the presence of this man just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. She had scarcely entered when another woman similarly laden came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black. After a brief period of blank astonishment in which the old man with the pipe had joined them, they all three burst into a laugh.
Look here, old Joe. Now, here's a chance. If we have an all free met without meaning it. You couldn't have met in a better place. What have you got to sell? What have you got to sell? Open that bundle, old Joe, and let me know the value of it.
Joe went down on his knees and dragged out a heavy bundle of some dark stuff.
What do you call this, bed curtains? Bed curtains. If he wanted to keep them after he was dead, wicked old screw, why weren't he more natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have somebody look after him, instead of lying, gossiping out his last there alone and by himself. That's the truest one that ever was spoke. But we didn't die when it catch it, eh? Don't be afraid of that. I ain't so fond of his company I'd run about for such things if he had.
Then old Joe produced a flannel bag with some money in it.
This is the end of it, you say? He frightened everyone away from him when he was alive. To profit us when he was dead,
Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. He viewed them as they gathered round their spoils in the dim light afforded by the old man's lamp with a detestation and disgust which could hardly have been greater had they been obscene demons marketing the corpse itself.
Yes, I see, Spirit. The life of this unhappy man might be my own. Oh, my life tends that way now, I see. Merciful heavens! Oh, what is this?
The scene had changed. He almost touched a bare, uncurtained bed. A pale light rising in the outer air shone upon this bed, and on it, underneath a ragged sheet, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this plundered, unknown man. Though dumb, it announced itself in awful language. Oh, cold, cold, rigid, dreadful death. Set thine altar here, and dress it with such terrors as thou hast at thy command, for this is thy dominion. But of the loved, revered, and honored head thou canst not turn one hair to thy dread purposes, or make one feature odious. It is not that the hand was heavy and would fall down when released. It is not that the heart and pulse are still, but that the hand was open, generous and true, the heart brave, warm and tender, and the pulse a man. Strike, shadow, strike, and see his good deeds springing from the wound to sow the world with life immortal. No voice pronounced those words in Scrooge's ears, but he heard them nonetheless when he gazed upon the body.
Spirit, let me see some tenderness connected to a death, or this dark chamber, Spirit, will be forever before me.
The ghost conveyed him to poor Bob Cratchit's house, where they found the mother and her children seated round the fire. The noisy little Cratchits were still as statues, and one corner sat looking up at Peter, who had an open book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in needlework, but surely they were very quiet. And he took a child and set him in the midst of them. Where had Scrooge heard those words? He had not dreamed them. The boy must have read them out when he and the spirit had crossed the threshold. Mrs. Cratchit laid her work upon the table and reached her hands up to her face. The colour hurts my eyes. The colour. Ah, poor Tiny Tim. The better now at last. Make some weep by candlelight. I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father for the world when he comes home. Must be near his time. Past it rather, said Peter, shutting up his book. I think he walks a little slower these few last evenings, mother. I have known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulders very fast indeed. He's very light, and his father loved him so. He's no trouble, no trouble. There's your father at the door. She hurried out to meet him. Bob was cheerful with them and spoke pleasantly to all the family. I wish you could have gone. Would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him we'd walk there on a Sunday. My little child. My little child. Away he goes. He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and the child would have been further apart. Spirit, something informs me. A parting moment is at hand. Tell me what man that was whom we saw lying dead. The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him to a dismal, wretched, ruinous churchyard. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. Before I draw nearer to that stone, answer me. Men's courses foreshadow certain ends, but if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me. The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name. Ebenezer Scrooge.
Am I that man who lay upon the bed?
The finger pointed from the grave to him and back again.
No, spirit! Oh, no! No!
The finger was still there.
Why show me this if I am past all hope?
For the first time, the hand began to shake.
Good spirit! Show me that I may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life.
The kind hand trembled.
I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three will strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach or tell me, that I may sponge away the writing on the stone by an altered life.
In his agony, he caught the spectral hand. He was strong in his entreaty and detained it. The spectre, stronger yet, repulsed him, and holding up his hands and one last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the spirit's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in. The bed curtains, they are not torn down. They are here. And I am here. And the shadows of the things that would have been will be dispelled. They will be. I know they will. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. Oh, heaven and the Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees, Jacob Marley, on my knees. I don't know what to do. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. Ooh, I'm as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody, and a Happy New Year to all the world. He was checked in his transports by the churches ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Clang, clash, hammer, ding, dong, bell, bell, clang, clash, hammer, ding, dong. Glorious, glorious! And running to the window, he opened it and put his head out. No mist, no fog, no night. Clear, bright, stirring, golden day.
Hello!
Scrooge cried out, calling down to a young boy in Sunday clothes.
What's today, my fine fellow? Today? Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day? I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything they like. Of course they can. Of course they can. Oh, hello, my fine fellow. Hello. Oh, do you know the poulterer is on the next street but one at the corner? I should hope I did. Oh, an intelligent boy. A remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey? Not the little prize turkey, the big one? What? One as big as me? Oh, a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck. It's hanging there now. Is it? Go and buy it. What? No. I am in earnest. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here, that I may give them direction on where to take it. Come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. Oh, come back with the man and I'll give you a half a crown. The boy was off like a shot. Oh, send it to Bob Cratchit. He shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. Oh, Joe Miller never made such a joke as sending it to Bob's will be.
The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did, and went downstairs to open the street door for the coming of the poulterer's man. It was a turkey. He never could have stood upon his legs, that bird. The chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey to be delivered, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy were to be exceeded only by the chuckle with which he sat down and chuckled until he cried. Scrooge dressed himself all in his best, and at last got out into the street. The people were by this time pouring forth as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present. And walking with his hands behind his back, he regarded everyone with such a delightful smile that 3 or 4 good-humored fellows said, "Good morning, sir. A Merry Christmas to you." Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he had ever heard, these were the blithest in his ears. Then, coming towards him, he observed the gentleman who had walked into his office the night before.
Mr. Scrooge? Yes, that is my name, and I'm afraid it may not be very pleasant to you, and for that I ask your pardon. And will you do me the goodness?
And here he whispered something into the gentleman's ear.
Oh, my dear Mr. Scrooge, are you serious? Yes, I am. Not a farthing less. There are a great many back payments in there, I assure you. My dear Mr. Scrooge, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. You will come to see me, won't you? I will. Thank you.
In the afternoon, he turned his steps towards his nephew's. He passed the door a dozen times before he got up enough courage to go up and knock, but he made a dash and did it.
Is your master at home?
Scrooge said to the girl. Yes, sir. He's in the dining room with his mistress, sir.
Well, he knows me,
said Scrooge with his hand already on the dining room lock.
Oh, I'll go in here, my dear. Fred? Why, bless my soul. Who's that? It is I, your uncle. Scrooge, I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?
Let him in.
It's a wonder he didn't shake his hand off.
Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did everyone. Wonderful party, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. But he was early at work the next morning. Oh, he was early then. If he could only get there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late, that was the thing he had set his heart upon. And he did it too. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob. Bob was a full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come into the tank. Bob's hat was off before he opened the door. His comforter, too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, dragging away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock.
Hello?
Growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as nearly as he could feign it.
What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?
Well, I am very sorry, sir. I am behind my time.
You are? Yes, I think you are. Step this way, if you please.
It's only once a year, sir. It should not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday.
I tell you what, my friend, I am not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer, and therefore...
Scrooge gave him such a dig in his waistcoat that he stumbled back into the tank.
And therefore, I am about to raise your salary.
Bob trembled and drew nearer the ruler.
A Merry Christmas, Bob.
Ooh,
a merrier Christmas than I've given you in many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family. We'll discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop. Oh, make up the fires, Bob, and buy a second coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit.
Scrooge was true to his words. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was like a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, as good a man as the good old city knew, or any good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. Scrooge had no further interaction with spirits, but lived in this regard upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards. It was said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us, and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, every one.